The 1970s were meant to be Britain's decade of reinvention. The old ways were being swept aside. New technology, new thinking, new ambition. And the car industry, battered but still standing, was promising a new generation of British cars that would prove the country still had what it took. The promises were bold, the expectations were real, and the disappointments, when they came, were devastating. Today on UK Car Vault, we are counting down 10 of the most disappointing British cars of the 1970s. Cars that promised revolution and delivered frustration. And by the time we reach number 1, you will meet a car that was genuinely meant to change everything. And changed nothing, except the people who believed in it. Let's begin. At number 10, the Morris Marina. Launched in 1971 by British Leyland, a car that arrived with reasonable expectations and systematically undermined every single one of them. British Leyland needed a conventional rear-wheel drive family car to compete with the Ford Cortina. The Marina was their answer. Simple engineering, familiar layout, accessible price. But the Marina was developed with a speed and a budget that left visible marks on the finished product. The front suspension was borrowed from the Minor, a car designed in the 1940s. In a 1971 family saloon competing with modern rivals, that decision was difficult to defend. The handling reflected those compromised origins. The build quality was inconsistent in ways that damaged British Leyland's already fragile reputation. And the styling gave buyers no emotional reason to choose it over the competition. The Marina sold in large numbers because the price was competitive. But sales figures and satisfaction figures told very different stories. The Marina disappointed almost everyone who drove it seriously.
At number 9, the Triumph TR7. Launched in 1975 as the car that British Leyland described as the shape of things to come. The wedge styling was certainly striking. Love it or hate it, the TR7 looked like nothing that had come before it in the TR lineage. That lineage had built a loyal and passionate following that the TR7 was supposed to inherit and expand. It did neither convincingly. The 2.0-liter four-cylinder engine was a significant step back from the TR6's straight-six in character and feel. The initial fixed-head-only configuration felt like a betrayal of what a TR car was supposed to be. And the build quality from the Speak factory was so poor that it became a recurring subject in the motoring press. TR loyalists felt abandoned. New buyers were not attracted in sufficient numbers to compensate. The TR7 is remembered as the car that ended a great British sports car lineage, rather than continuing it.
At number 8, the Austin Allegro. Launched in 1973 as British Leyland's replacement for the beloved 1100 and 1300 range. A replacement that nobody who owned the original ever asked for, and nobody who drove the Allegro ever forgave. The styling was immediately controversial, rounded, bulbous, and awkward in proportions that even sympathetic observers struggled to defend. The Cortex steering wheel became a national joke before the car had been on sale for a month. The build quality reflected everything that was going wrong inside British Leyland. Doors that failed to seal, windows that leaked, electrical systems that failed with imagination and regularity, and a rear window that could pop out under certain conditions. The Allegro was not without genuine merit. The Hydrogas suspension gave it a ride quality that surprised people. But merit buried under poor quality and poor execution is merit the public never gets to appreciate. The Allegro became the symbol of British Leyland's decline. That is a heavy burden for any car to carry. At number 7, the Vauxhall Cavalier Mark I. Launched in 1975 as Vauxhall's answer to the Ford Cortina, the car that had dominated the British family car market for over a decade. The Cavalier was not a bad car. It was competent, reasonably well built, and offered the kind of conventional family car experience that buyers understood and trusted. But competent and conventional are not the same as good. And in 1975, the Cortina was genuinely good, refined, well-developed, and backed by Ford's considerable engineering and marketing resources. The Cavalier felt like a car designed to match the Cortina, rather than beat it.
Every decision seemed to ask what Ford had done, and then do approximately the same thing. The result was a car that arrived in second place and never seriously challenged for first. For a car presented as a genuine Cortina rival, finishing a credible but uninspiring second was a disappointment that Vauxhall's marketing could not disguise.
At number 6, the Hillman Avenger. Launched in 1970 by Chrysler UK, a family saloon that promised modernity and delivered ordinariness. The Avenger had been developed with genuine care. The engineering was more modern than much of what British Leyland was producing. The styling was clean, and the driving experience was competent in the way family cars needed to be. But the Avenger existed in a market where competent was not enough. The Ford Cortina was better, the Vauxhall Vivo was comparable, and the Avenger never found a compelling reason for buyers to choose it over the alternatives. The Chrysler UK marketing machine was significantly smaller than Ford's. The dealer network was thinner, and a car that needed every possible advantage found itself competing with one hand tied behind its back. The Avenger deserved better than the indifference it mostly received.
At number 4, the Reliant Robin, launched in 1973, a car that became one of the most recognizable vehicles in Britain, and not for reasons that Reliant would have chosen. The Robin replaced the Reliant Regal with a more modern fiberglass body and the same three-wheel layout. The economy figures were genuinely impressive. The interior was more carefully finished than previous Reliants. But the Robin's handling, particularly the tendency to tip onto two wheels in corners, became the subject of national comedy. Television programs demonstrated the tipping. Comedians made careers from the jokes. And the Robin's association with a particular television character ensured that no engineering merit could survive the cultural weight of the laughter. Reliant served its buyers genuinely well, but the Robin became famous for exactly the wrong reasons, and it never recovered from that fame.
At number 3, the Princess 2200 HLS, the top specification variant of British Leyland's Princess range, a car that represented what British Leyland's executive ambitions looked like when given full expression. The specification was genuinely impressive on paper. The 2.2-liter six-cylinder engine, full leather interior, wood veneer, everything that a genuine executive car required, assembled carefully and presented with real ambition. But the Princess carried the structural and quality problems that ran through everything British Leyland produced in the late 1970s. The body corroded, the electrics failed, the fit and finish reflected the industrial chaos on the factory floor. Buyers who paid HLS money expected HLS quality. The 2200 HLS had the ingredients of something genuinely impressive. British Leyland's inability to assemble those ingredients consistently was the tragedy that followed it throughout its entire production life. At number 2, the Triumph Stag. Launched in 1970 with a level of anticipation that few British cars had ever generated. A Grand Tourer, open top, V8 engine, T-bar roof, styled by Giovanni Michelotti. Everything about the Stag on paper was exactly what Britain needed. A genuine rival to the Continental Grand Tours, capturing enthusiast attention across Europe. The press coverage at launch was extraordinary. This was supposed to be the car that proved British Leyland could produce something truly world-class. Then the engines started failing. The 3.0-liter V8 overheated. Head gaskets failed. The cooling system could not manage the demands placed on it. Problems that should have been resolved during development arrived instead in the hands of customers who had trusted the Triumph name. The Stag looked like a dream and performed like a warning. Underneath the mechanical failures was a genuinely beautiful car that deserved so much better than it got. And here we are at number 1, the car that was genuinely meant to be revolutionary. The Rover SD1. Launched in 1976, the styling was stunning. David Bash's design, influenced by the Ferrari Daytona, was the most beautiful British saloon of the decade. It won Car of the Year in 1977. The press was unanimous. The public was genuinely excited.
The 3.5-liter V8 gave it performance that matched the looks. The hatchback body was practical. The driving experience was genuinely rewarding. For that first moment, the SD1 was everything it had promised to be. And then the build quality from the Solihull factory revealed itself. Cars left the production line with faults that should never have reached the showroom. Electrical failures, body fit problems, mechanical issues that no Car of the Year winner should have been delivering to its customers. The reputation built at launch was destroyed within months. Fleet buyers moved to BMW and Mercedes and did not come back. Britain had built something genuinely world-class, and then failed to build it properly. That remains the most disappointing story in the entire decade of British motoring.
10 cars, 10 disappointments, 10 moments when the gap between promise and reality defined a decade. The 1970s were hard years for Britain, but pressure and challenge do not excuse the delivery of cars that let good people down. The buyers of these cars deserved better. Most of them knew it, and most of them never forgot it. Leave a comment below. We read every single comment. And if you love British motoring history, subscribe to UK Car Vault. We'll keep telling the stories worth remembering.